In our village, there was an unspoken taboo. They said women were yin, men were yang, and for a harmonious balance, one must avoid the 9 woes. If a man married, and his bride was not a virgin on their wedding night, their family would forever be denied the blessings of the fertility god. They would be cursed with an empty lineage, their bloodline ending with them. You might think it's just a myth, but it was all too real. Our village held a 1,000-year-old sacred tree. It was believed that any newlywed woman, if she spent her wedding night praying for blessings inside the tree shrine, would conceive sextuplets the very next day when she consummated her marriage with her husband. For as long as I could remember, the women in our village always seemed to be pregnant, their bellies swollen to monstrous sizes, as if an enormous pot had been inverted over their midsections. Their skin stretched taut like the thin membrane inside an eggshell, constantly threatening to burst. Yet they seemed utterly accustomed to it, spending their days at the village entrance, cradling their massive bumps, laughing, chatting, and working without a moment's rest, as if giving birth was the simplest, easiest thing in the world. After delivering 6 children, they would recuperate for half a year, then dress in their finest clothes, and once again enter the tree shrine to pray. Before long, their bellies would swell to colossal proportions again. Only those who were no longer virgins had to visit the tree shrine many times to conceive sextuplets again. My mother, however, was a peculiar anomaly in our village. She was the only woman who couldn't bear sextuplets. Our family only had my sister and me. No matter how much my father and grandmother beat and tormented her, she stubbornly refused to enter the tree shrine to pray for blessings. Because of this, she was like a rat scurrying across the street. Anyone who saw her would hurl insults and mockery. Good words or bad, my mother absorbed it all, letting it roll off her back as she lived her life on her own turf. When my sister was 7, she was chosen to be a fertility maiden. According to village custom, she had to stay in the tree shrine for 3 days and 3 nights, praying for blessings. My mother's usually placid face finally cracked. She went wild, desperately trying to stop it all. But the village elder declared that this was the will of the fertility god within the tree shrine, and it could not be defied. My mother retorted that she didn't believe in the fertility god's demonic pronouncements. She didn't want my sister to be a fertility maiden. The moment these words left her lips, the entire village attacked her. I will never forget that day. A surging crowd stormed into our house, armed with hoes, clubs, axes, and anything else they could grab, as if they wanted to tear my mother apart on the spot. My father, in a fit of rage, his face contorted with savagery, punched my mother repeatedly, driving her body into the soft earth. My sister and I, so small, clung to his legs, crying, but not a shred of mercy touched him. My mother was beaten into a coma for 3 days and 3 nights, and my sister remained in the dark tree shrine for those same 3 days and nights. As compensation, the village elder offered 50,000 yuan, considering it payment for my sister becoming a fertility maiden. My grandmother and father gleefully accepted, their resentment towards my mother finally subsiding somewhat. The moment my sister returned, she clutched her clothes tightly to her chest, her eyes vacant, her whole body trembling with panic and unease. I wanted to cheer her up, to place a milk candy in her palm, But the instant I touched her sleeve, she screamed for me to get away. She frantically flailed her arms, trying to ward off anyone who came near. My mother, dragging her bruised body from the bed, desperately and heartbrokenly pulled my sister into her embrace, weeping and muttering endlessly. I am sorry. My sister gradually quieted in my mother's arms, as if recognizing she was finally home, then burst into uncontrollable sobs. The strange thing was that while every household in the village had pregnant women, the cries of newborns were rarely heard. At first, I didn't understand why other families lived in multi-story houses and drove luxury cars, while ours was just 3 small rooms and a rickety 3-wheeled cart. As I grew older, I uncovered the truth. All the children born were sold for exorbitant prices. High-paying buyers could even acquire 2 or 3 children at once, raising them as twins or triplets. This was why the men in our village idled their days away, yet every home was overflowing with wealth. There was another unspoken rule in the village. The firstborn child, regardless of gender, had to be raised by the parents and could not be sold otherwise. The fertility god would be displeased. It was a way to keep a seed in the family. Sons would grow up and marry women from outside the village, while daughters would attract worthy sons-in-law to settle there. These newcomers were mostly from impoverished families. No one wealthy would ever come to this remote mountainous region, even though every house in the village was an extravagant villa. My maternal grandfather had sold my mother to my father for 100,000 yuan. When they married, everyone in the village envied my father for having such a beautiful wife. But my mother refused to go to the tree shrine to pray, and my father was accustomed to spending money like water. Our family's fortunes steadily declined. Within a few years, we became the poorest household in the village. My father had originally wanted to buy another wife, but there was no money left to acquire a new one. So, he placed all his hopes on my sister and me. When my sister was chosen to be a fertility maiden again, his head, which had rarely been held high, now swelled with pride and self-satisfaction. My mother, on the other hand, placed all her hope in education. She dreamed that my sister and I would pass our exams, get into a good university, and leave this village, never to return. In the eyes of others, the idea of higher education seemed utterly ludicrous. The villagers, accustomed to profiting from endless pregnancies and selling their children, thought my mother was a complete fool. There was a clear, easy path to wealth, yet she insisted on choosing one that was both arduous and uncertain of success. However, my sister didn't even finish high school before she went out to work. My father's constant beatings of my mother had become unbearable for her. My sister wanted to earn money to support our family, but less than 2 years into her job, she called home to announce she was getting married. The man was 10 years older than her, treated her wonderfully, and she even said she had found love. My mother worried sleeplessly for several nights, fearing my sister was being deceived or would suffer outside the village. But then, the man arrived in a luxurious car, bringing generous gifts to visit my parents. My mother visibly breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't seem like a swindler. Later, my mother visited their newlywed home in a prominent red soil city. A frighteningly opulent villa. Even the village elder's grand house couldn't compare to a fraction of this man's residence. My mother's anxieties quickly returned. My sister was so good, innocent, kind, beautiful, and charming. But such a wealthy family was clearly not a match for ours. My mother always felt that his intentions for marrying my sister were not simple. Yet he offered a dowry of 2 million yuan and treated us with utmost politeness and consideration, never once looking down on us, not a hint of disdain. My father and grandmother, seeing so much money, nearly went mad, eager for them to marry on the spot. My sister's adoring and ardent gaze was always fixed on the man, and he occasionally returned it with a doting look. I had never seen my sister so joyful and happy. My mother probably hadn't either. I also probably hadn't either. But she still refused to let them marry so quickly, her face always etched with a heavy heart. My father, once again, beat her nearly to death, calling her a jinx who always stood in the way of his fortune. My mother lay on the bed, unable to move, completely drained of the strength to object. Less than 3 months into her marriage, my sister became pregnant. But when my mother heard it was a sextuplet pregnancy, she couldn't believe it. That very night, she hired a car to go find my sister. Pregnancy was normally a joyous occasion, but for my mother, the word sextuplet pregnancy felt like a curse. No matter how much my mother pressed her, my sister refused to admit that she had returned to the village or visited the tree shrine to pray. She merely said she was a fertility maiden, and this was her inherent good fortune. As she spoke these words, she dared not look my mother in the eye, but she smugly glanced at her mother-in-law standing nearby. Honestly, I didn't like that old woman. She always looked at us with a half-smile, feigning sincerity. But her thinly veiled contempt and scorn were something I always caught. My sister had also told me that her mother-in-law used to sarcastically say she couldn't get pregnant, couldn't bear 6 children. Now, seeing my sister caress her pregnant belly, silently boasting, her mother-in-law's eyes were full of cold smiles, yet her face showed utmost benevolence. I, too, began to feel uneasy, mirroring my mother's anxieties. My mother had initially planned to stay and care for my sister, but my brother-in-law insisted repeatedly that he would take excellent care of her. Their household had numerous servants, so my mother's presence seemed unnecessary, and she reluctantly left. Every day, my mother video called my sister, still unable to shake off her worry. I also used the phone my sister had given me to talk to her daily, but I always felt she wasn't as cheerful as when she spoke to Mother. It wasn't genuine happiness. She would utter sad, cryptic words, asking me, "What is the true purpose of human life?" Before I could answer, she would answer herself. "Perhaps life is meant to have someone who loves you." The tragedy finally struck during my sister's childbirth. She suffered an amniotic fluid embolism. All the babies were born safely, but she passed away after resuscitation efforts failed. When my mother received the call, she collapsed to the ground, unable to stand. By the time our family arrived, my sister's body had already been cremated, leaving only a cold urn of ashes in the mourning hall. My brother-in-law explained that they belonged to the Yi ethnic group, and cremation after death was customary to cleanse the soul for reincarnation. My mother and I looked at the 6 rosy babies, tears streaming down our faces, unable to utter a sound. These were the children my sister had exchanged her very life for. My sister's death was extremely strange. My mother and I both agreed that something was amiss from beginning to end. But before we could voice our suspicions, my brother-in-law offered a large sum of money. Of course, my father wouldn't allow us to offend this god of wealth, and he forcefully dragged us away. After returning to the village, rumors spread like wildfire, claiming that my sister, a fertility maiden, dared to marry, and her tragic death was a just retribution. Otherwise, with so many women in the village bearing sextuplets, why would only Eshe die? They sneered, laughing merrily. I picked up a stone from behind me and hurled it at them. The fertility god, the tree shrine, the blessings. What were all these things, really? I was in my final year of high school then. I knew these matters defied scientific logic, but my mother repeatedly warned me not to go near the tree shrine. My studies were intense, and I only returned home once a month. Each time, my mother's body bore new bruises layered over old wounds. I secretly vowed that once I passed my university entrance exams, I would definitely take my mother out of this village. We would be together, no matter how hard our lives, even if we had to scavenge for scrap, just to never again endure my father's domestic violence. My father had received a considerable sum of money from my brother-in-law. Even a small fraction of it would have been enough for my expenses. But he refused, steadfastly maintaining that schooling was useless. Even if I passed the entrance exams to the nation's top university, I would still be forced back to the village to marry and bear children, as if that were my unchangeable fate. Before the new semester began, my mother transferred money for my tuition. She said she had found precious medicinal herbs in the mountains and sold them for a good price, telling me to study without worry. At that time, I was already working in a factory. Faced with this hard-won opportunity to study, I worked even harder. But the frequency of my calls to my mother dwindled. Her voice was always weary. Each time I asked, she would say it was just from working hard. During the national holiday, I used my earnings from odd jobs to buy a ticket home. Under the cover of darkness, I entered the village. And from a distance, I saw my mother in the courtyard, wiping away tears. That swollen, balloon-like belly was terrifyingly familiar. Had my mother finally gone to the tree shrine to pray for blessings? I stood in the shadows, staring at her abdomen, trying to discern something. My sister's belly had been this big before, hadn't it? A slender waist, struggling to support such a massive belly. I even worried if her spine would snap. All these misfortunes seemed to originate from that tree shrine, from the fertility god everyone whispered about. How was it that I found myself standing before that 1,000-year-old ancient tree? A bone-chilling wind blew from the dark tree shrine, carrying the stench of sewage and urine, both foul and nauseating. Suddenly, I saw a pair of glowing red eyes appear in the darkness, piercingly cold, glinting with ferocity and bloodlust. "Hey! How? Little girl, why don't you come inside?" The raspy, ancient voice was full of enticement, and the foul odor in the air intensified. The surrounding silence was terrifying. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was my mother. I stifled my pounding heart, let out a relieved breath, and looked up. The glowing red eyes were gone. What I had just seen and heard seemed to be a hallucination. Mia, mother misses you very much. Never come back to the village again, and never contact anyone here ever. My mother's voice was very weak, stifling immense pain. Still on the phone, I ran home like a madwoman. In the courtyard, my mother lay on the ground, clutching her belly in agony. My grandmother dragged my father's arm, yelling obscenities and arguing against calling an ambulance. Has any woman in this village ever gone to the hospital to give birth? The fertility god blesses all mothers. If anything goes wrong, it means the fertility god dislikes her. Why should we keep someone the god despises, bringing bad luck upon us? This premature birth is an omen, a divine warning. Her fate tonight, whether she lives or dies, is her own destiny. When I suddenly appeared, they all froze for a moment. On the way, my mother's call had abruptly cut off, but I had already called for an ambulance. At that moment, I felt my decision was absolutely right. Seeing the footprints on my mother's clothes, I guessed what had happened. Looking at my father, I felt nothing but utter revulsion. And my grandmother, her face ferocious, her words venomous. How could she, a woman herself, be like this? When the ambulance called back, they said they couldn't find the village. I asked for their location. They were clearly right at the village entrance, so how could they not find it? I ran out, intending to guide the ambulance in. My mother had fainted by then, her situation extremely critical. My father and grandmother had gone inside to sleep, their indifference infuriating. I ran out of the village, looked back, and saw only an impenetrable blackness. Outside the village, the moon hung bright and clear in the sky. This was the first time I had truly sensed the village's strangeness. The night sky within. The village was utterly black, without a single crack of light. After dawn broke, we finally made our way in. Beneath my mother was a pool of blood. Her heart had stopped. She had died with her eyes wide open, staring. All night, it was as if we had been blinded by a demon, circling outside the village, unable to find our way in. I hatefully grasped my mother's cold hand, feeling as though my own heart had died right then. My father emerged from the house, embracing a flirtatious woman, his face radiating satisfaction. My grandmother spat on the ground, her face etched with disgust. The neighbors pointed and whispered, saying my mother had completely offended the fertility god, even losing her life, and fearfully instructed their children never to follow my mother's example, but always to respect the fertility god. All women who didn't pray would be cursed. Oh, the more they talked, the more bizarre the stories became, filling the air with an eerie and sinister atmosphere. The medical staff shook their heads and sighed before leaving. To die in one's own courtyard while carrying sextuplets, they too felt heartbroken. The village elder, pushing through the crowd, happily rushed over, continuously congratulating my father, declaring, "The fertility god has chosen Mia as the new fertility maiden." The crowd buzzed, everyone admiring me. A fertility maiden meant being able to enter and exit the tree shrine freely at any time, without needing the fertility god's consent. Married women who wished to enter and pray for children couldn't always do so, except for the first wedding night, which didn't require the fertility god's approval. All other times demanded offerings of food and gold at the entrance. If the gold vanished, it meant the fertility god agreed to the blessing. If the food disappeared, it meant the fertility god disagreed. Those women, desperate to keep bearing sextuplets, were consumed with envy, dreaming of becoming a fertility maiden themselves. My father's previous attitude towards me changed drastically, becoming overly enthusiastic. Recalling the glowing red eyes in the dark tree shrine, I felt the air around me grow chilling. It was as if a pair of eyes was constantly staring at me from the darkness. My father, fearing I would run away, locked me in my room. My grandmother sat guarding the door, not moving an inch, just waiting to take me to the tree shrine for blessings in 2 days. Just as my sister had done, to stay there for 3 days and 3 nights. My mother's coffin was placed in the courtyard. That was my only demand. I would only agree to become a fertility maiden after she was buried. Otherwise, I would die right there in front of my father. It was all a calculated risk on both sides. The village night was eerie silent. My grandmother couldn't resist the urge to sleep, her head eventually nodding off. Oh, my father was in another room, indulging with his newly acquired mistress. Hearing those unspeakable sounds, and looking through the window at my mother in the courtyard, I felt deep hatred and profound sorrow. Creaking, like something sharp scraping wood, the sound became piercingly loud in the dead of night. I was certain it was coming from the coffin. I clung to the window-sill, staring intently at the coffin. The cracking grew louder, and the coffin nails popped out one by one. I saw a pair of hands with long black nails reaching out. For some reason, I felt a strange thrill. A gust of wind swept through, and the coffin lid flew open. My mother, her hair disheveled, sat bolt upright from the coffin, her face a pale yellow, blood-like tears flowing from her eyes. She sprang to the ground like a reanimated corpse. My grandmother snored like thunder, oblivious to everything. My mother, stiff and mechanical, moved towards her, blowing out a forceful breath. To my horrified amazement, she spat a black, foul-smelling liquid into my grandmother's snoring mouth. She raised her head and looked at me, seemingly pondering for a long moment with a look of suspicion. My father, hearing the commotion, came out. When he clearly saw it was my mother, he gasped and fearfully fled back into the house. My mother immediately turned her rigid, mechanical gaze towards him. The heavy wooden door was easily shredded into splinters by her fingernails. My father scrambled out, my mother in hot pursuit. They chased each other around the walnut tree in the courtyard. My mother pursued to the right. My father dodged to the left. She pursued to the left. He dodged to the right. After several rounds, my mother, clearly enraged, suddenly stopped, standing still. My father gasped for breath, dripping with sweat, dodging and resting. In just a few breaths, my mother suddenly lunged forward, letting out a piercing roar. Her fingernails pierced straight through the rough trunk of the tree, just millimeters from tearing my father's throat. Seizing the moment while my mother's arm was trapped and immobile in the tree, my father screamed for help and ran. Swallowing with difficulty, I smashed the glass window, using a back scratcher to hook the bunch of keys from my grandmother's pocket by the door. Creak! The door swung open. My mother quieted, looking at me strangely, her stiff face seemingly trying to force a smile. "Mother, wait for me to return. I will definitely save you." In the darkness, the village road, once so familiar, now felt like a desperate escape. As I ran like a madwoman towards the village entrance, I crashed into a man. He lay on the ground, groaning and clutching his stomach. "Where did you come from? Are you human or ghost?" I apologized repeatedly, constantly looking back towards the village. "Are you from the Sextuplet village?" It was then I noticed a girl with a ponytail standing nearby. She was casually munching on sunflower seeds, her expression impatient as she looked at me. When I nodded, her eyes lit up. The man on the ground stopped groaning, scrambled up, and tightly gripped my arm. "Grandma, I told you, that village is right nearby." Hearing the word "Grandma," I instinctively flinched, glancing towards the village entrance, before realizing the man was addressing the girl in front of me. The man introduced himself as Dax, and the girl as his grandmother, Kira. They owned a shop called Feng Shui of Peace and Serenity in the city. I soon understood the gist of the story. My brother-in-law's cousin had sought them out. Because my brother-in-law had 6 children, he had become the largest shareholder in their corporation, according to the share distribution. It was the old, tired tale of power struggles within a wealthy family, full of hidden currents, mutual accusations, and attempts to bring each other down. But why would they seek out these two? They seemed like itinerant charlatans, too young to be trustworthy. Surely they should have found someone older, more reputable. Kira simply pulled out a stack of yellow talismans, drew my finger, made a cut, and dripped a drop of blood onto a talisman. Before I could even gasp, she was done. The talisman spontaneously ignited, a green flame choking my protests in my throat, as the ashes coalesced into a glowing rune in mid-air. Kira turned, casually saying, "Pee on it." He looked even more bewildered than I did. "Dax, use your pure boy's urine to break the village's illusionary spell." I turned away, and Dax's face contorted in an awkward, embarrassed expression. Grandma." Hearing his hesitance, Kira, with a rhythmic swing of her hand, scattered the ashes of the rune over the darkened village. With my own eyes, I watched as the village gradually materialized under the moonlight. I instantly gained a new understanding of the two people before me. If I had only met them sooner, perhaps my mother wouldn't have died. I immediately knelt and recounted everything I had experienced, not missing a single detail. Dax acted like a chorus, interjecting with babbling remarks. When I cried, he cried along. When I laughed, he laughed too. Kira, in contrast, calmly chewed on her sunflower seeds, listening without a single reaction. "Oh, my grandma, this is a big one. Once we finish this, our merit points will surely skyrocket." Dax excitedly rubbed his hands together. Kira flicked her ponytail and walked straight into the village, humming a tune, seemingly in good spirits. First, Kira told me to lead her to the tree shrine. From afar, it looked as if a mass of black bones enveloped the place. Dax muttered that the evil energy was too dense. The girl erected a shimmering golden spiritual formation on the spot, placing several golden 5 emperor's coins around it. The formation then floated into the air, imprisoning the area above the tree shrine. When we returned home, the village elder had led people to chain my mother, now a reanimated corpse, to the walnut tree with iron chains as thick as an arm. My grandmother was still deeply asleep, unresponsive. Kira instructed me to boil water with my mother's underwear or socks from when she was alive and make my grandmother drink it. "She'll wake up," she said. I reluctantly stood there, hesitant to save her. "Hee." Kira's face turned serious. "Go now. If your grandmother truly dies because of your mother, don't expect your mother to enter reincarnation. Good and evil have their karmic consequences. Go now. It will really be too late once the sun rises." Hearing this, I no longer hesitated and quickly went to prepare. I didn't know why I trusted the person in front of me so much. There seemed to be a righteous aura about her. A bowl of foul-smelling sock water poured down, and my grandmother vomited a sticky, black, smelly liquid. After throwing up, she regained consciousness. When the villagers saw my grandmother awaken, they looked at Kira with deep reverence, calling her grandmaster and asking her to deal with my mother. The girl winked, then slapped a talisman onto my mother's face. My mother, who had been struggling wildly, instantly stiffened, unable to move. I worried and wanted to intervene, but Dax pulled me back, whispering, "Just watch. My grandma hates these kinds of ignorant and evil villagers the most." My grandmother, just awake, was already screaming for my mother to be burned alive, while my father stared at me with a dark, brooding intensity. My mother's arm was deeply embedded in the tree trunk, and no one could pull it out. Kira gestured for me to step forward. The moment I touched my mother, her rigid body instantly went limp, falling into my arms. She was so light. I was able to carry her horizontally and place her back in the coffin. Mia's mother died tragically during childbirth, and her resentment is sky-high, Kira stated solemnly, her voice carrying the ominous tone of a dark tale. If not properly handled, even if the body is burned, her ghost will return to claim your lives. The atmosphere was tense, and Dax beside me bowed his head, stifling his laughter. Everyone's faces showed panic as they murmured amongst themselves about what to do. 3 drops of fingertip, blood from every villager, the urine of all children born in the year of the dragon, and a basin of rainwater collected after dawn, sun exposed for 2 hours. The village elder frowned, skeptical. What if it doesn't rain after dawn? What if it's cloudy at noon with no sun? The situations you describe will not occur. Kira replied, clearly displeased that someone would question her expertise. The villagers murmured amongst themselves, full of doubt towards her. But she simply lay on a rocking chair, even dozing off. Just as dawn broke, a strong wind began to blow ceaselessly. 5 minutes, Kira said, a cryptic smile playing on her lips, reminding everyone to go home and prepare to collect rainwater. But no one seemed to believe her. They all stood still. I dutifully placed the basin in the middle of the courtyard, then carefully closed the coffin lid and covered it with a waterproof tarp. Kira looked at me approvingly, nodding. I glanced at my watch. Exactly 5 minutes later, rain poured down as if from a tipped bucket. The villagers' expressions instantly changed. They all rushed home to collect rainwater. Standing under the eaves, I looked at the gloomy sky. For a fleeting moment, I seemed to see a giant black snake coiling in the clouds. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but saw nothing. The basin, in just a moment, was overflowing with water. Should I tell Thu Nuong to stop now? Dax looked up at the sky. No rush. Let it rain a bit longer, Kira said, delicately spitting out a sunflower seed husk. 5 minutes later, Dax turned away to make a phone call. The moment he hung up, the rain stopped completely, and the sky, moments ago filled with dark clouds, instantly cleared. I looked up in disbelief. The giant black snake flashed once more, then vanished. I asked Dax if he had seen anything. He casually replied, "That's one of ours. Don't be scared." Hearing that, I became even more terrified. Who exactly are you people? The three great sages of Ghostly Summit, Dax said with a proud look. I shook my head, indicating I had never heard of them. He then disappointedly lowered his head, saying, "Well, either way, we're good people." The sudden change in weather made the villagers revere Kira like a goddess. They began slaughtering chickens and sheep, a festive commotion filling the air. My father brought a fiery red dress, telling me to wear it, saying that once Kira had dealt with my mother. I'll start visiting the tree shrine tonight to begin earning money for the family again. Dax said he would always be by my side. And yes, that he would always be by my side, as his grandmother had instructed him what to do. That night, our house was packed with people. My father brought me to the tree shrine, and only after seeing me enter did he leave, satisfied. The foul, fishy odor in the air made me retch uncontrollably, my eyes watering. Dax had plastered small talismans all over his face, covering his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, and another on his chest. He said that this way, whatever was inside the tree shrine wouldn't recognize his existence. The urine of children born in the year of the dragon was, in fact, dragon's urine, fingertip blood, being yang, and collected from the entire village, possessed invincible power. Combined with the sky-fallen rainwater, it would be even more potent. Now, all these ingredients were on us. A large amount of sky-fallen rainwater had been collected, but Kira's small gourd held it all. The villagers had painstakingly prepared these things, unknowingly for the destruction of their great fertility god. Power! My heart swelled with fierce satisfaction. I was even prepared to die here tonight. If it meant war, then let it be a fight to the death, for I cared little for my life, so long as this monster could be eradicated. But I hadn't expected the tree shrine, which seemed small from the outside, to contain an entirely different world within. Exquisitely carved pavilions and long corridors stretched endlessly. When I turned to look back, the path we had taken had vanished. I stubbornly walked straight ahead. Dax babbled incessantly beside me, easing my fear and tension. "Little girl, you finally come. I've missed you so much." It was that same raspy, ancient, seductive voice again. The path before us instantly changed. 4 figures with pointed mouths, protruding teeth, and vacant eyes appeared before me. They gestured for me to get into a sedan chair. Dax nodded, and together we sat inside. "Too heavy! Get 2 more to carry," a shrill voice commanded. Through the curtain, I saw 4 more feet appear on the ground. Though they belonged to men, their feet were smaller than a woman's. "Be careful. They aren't human," Dax whispered in my ear. I clutched my hands tightly, trembling uncontrollably. A small slit in the curtain allowed me to see them taking small, ghost-like steps, moving incredibly fast. The sedan chair was lowered. I pulled back the curtain, finding myself in a barren room. Apart from a bed, there was nothing else. The stench of urine in the air was so strong it stung my eyes, making me dry heave and tear up. Dax handed me a piece of paper, gesturing for me to stuff it up my nose. He tap-tap-tappy. Footsteps approached from afar. Dax meticulously rechecked the talismans on his body. A maiden scent truly is fragrant. A gaunt, withered old man entered, leaning close to me, inhaling deeply. His expression greedy and lecherous. Is he the fertility god? Terrified to my core, I was paradoxically calmer than ever before. "Don't worry, little girl. I'll make sure you bear sextuplets endlessly. Be a good girl. Just serve me well." With that, his foul-smelling mouth lunged towards mine, intending to kiss me. Disgusting. Utterly disgusting. I touched the small gourd at my hip, carefully recalling Dax's instructions. Then I poured the entire gourd of pure boy's urine directly onto the fertility god's head. He screamed, clutching his head, and collapsed to the ground with a shriek. Wherever the urine touched, it was as if strong acid had corroded him, leaving raw, oozing sores. Saying this, I poured the rest of it over him. He thrashed on the ground, emitting frantic squeaking sounds. A thick, strong rat tail burst from behind him, whipping wildly. I was swept off my feet and fell to the ground. "You vile wretch! How dare you harm me?" Seeing the fertility god's claws about to seize me, Dax pulled me away. I dodged. The tiles in the room began to fall in chunks. Dax signaled for me to hurry. I bit my tongue fiercely, mixing the blood with drops from my fingertips. I soaked a yellow talisman in the blood, set it alight, and hurled it at the fertility god. Kira had said your destiny is unique. The fertility god will greatly fear your blood. It's fortunate you haven't truly prayed for blessings yet, or it would be useless. The human body on the ground immediately swelled to an infinite size, its distorted form thrashing, its withered skin instantly covered in rat fur. Dax pulled me, and we began to run outside, scattering the sky-fallen rainwater everywhere we passed. I looked back, and wherever the water fell, fierce flames erupted. The giant rat squeaked furiously behind us, trying to pursue, but the fire temporarily slowed its speed. The world within the tree rapidly collapsed. The moment we escaped, the 1,000-year-old ancient tree burst into raging flames. From inside the tree shrine, thousands of rats poured out like a tide. They squeaked and scattered in panic. Immediately after, a rat the size of a cow pushed its way out. It truly astonished me. Dax poured out all the sky-fallen rainwater. The water fell to the ground, forming a violent wave that precisely pushed the scattering rats back into the tree shrine. The great tree blazed, its fire illuminating the entire night sky. The villagers rushed over, all stunned, some elders reacting first, falling to their knees and wailing. Dax stepped onto the giant rat, impatiently pulling the yellow talismans from his face. "Grandma! Mission accomplished! The so-called fertility god is nothing but a rotten rat." The moment he uttered these words, the villagers' anger was fully ignited. Perhaps they realized that from now on, they could no longer bear sextuplets to sell for money. "Kill them! I am still your god!" The rat, barely clinging to life, spoke in a human voice. "Use her blood, Mia. Heart blood, fingertip blood, and tip of the tongue blood. That's how you can completely kill this filthy thing." Kira's voice transmitted directly to my mind, though I never saw her speak. The people around me seemed not to hear this command. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment. She nodded at me, making a finishing gesture. I thought of my mother, who had died and then become a reanimated corpse, and my sister, who had died before she was 20. They both loved me, doted on me. Because of this vile rat, everything had vanished. The knife piercing my heart truly hurt. All 10 fingertips throbbed. My fingers were also in immense pain, and my tongue felt as if I had bitten it in half. Pain, pain, immense pain. But as this single dose of blood poured down, the giant rat shrieked, thrashing about. In just a moment, its limbs stiffened, and it stopped moving. Its body visibly rotted from the inside out until it dissolved into a pool of blood. Only then did Kira become animated, cursing at the puddle of blood, then taking out the gourd from her hip and collecting something into it. Dax said, "This is what we call pulling out the roots. The evil spirit would be taken back to Ghostly Summit to be refined into fertilizer. That's the best use for it." At this moment, the villagers were utterly dumbfounded. Everything had happened too quickly. When they finally reacted and tried to attack us, Kira had already whisked us away from the village. "But is it okay to just put my mother's body directly into your car?" I worried a bit. This car isn't cheap, and aren't wealthy people usually very particular about such things? "If it can save your mother, would you be willing?" Kira stared at me, her expression serious. "Of course, I would. No matter the cost. I have no hesitation." Why did my mother go to the tree shrine to pray for sextuplets? This was clearly something she always opposed. Even with my father's frequent beatings, she never wavered. My sister's tragic death had terrified her, and her desire for me to go to university and leave the village had reached its peak. But my father wouldn't let me study, wouldn't give me money, and constantly found ways to bring me back to the village, wanting to force me to stay. It was then that my mother had used her pregnancy to bargain with my father. Everything was for me. I only hated myself for not discovering these things sooner. "All right, your words are enough," Kira said. "But first, let me remove the knife from your chest." It was only then that I realized the knife was still plunged into my chest. The part of my tongue I had bitten off seemed to have grown back, and surprisingly, it didn't hurt to speak. Dax burst into hearty laughter as he drove, the scene a bit humorous. Logically, I should have been dead, but now my body felt healthier than ever. Before saving my mother, Kira said we had to resolve the issue between my brother-in-law and his cousin first. She explained that since she had accepted money from the cousin, My matter was merely a convenient side task. All right, I thought. A small side task has accomplished something so great. The moment we entered my brother-in-law's courtyard, the unsettling feeling of being watched from the shadows returned, making my skin crawl. My sister's mother-in-law's face was filled with contempt the moment she saw me. Here to freeload again? Don't your people have hands and feet? Hello? I've come to see the children, I replied. The moment I mentioned the children, her expression grew unnatural, and she made every excuse to avoid letting me see them. Can't you see them? Or won't you let them be seen? Or is there no way to see them? Kira's cold voice cut through the air. The old woman clearly began to panic. It was then that I noticed, after not seeing her for a long time, she seemed to have grown much younger. Inside the house, I saw only two pitifully thin children. At over 2 years old, they should surely have been walking, but they could only crawl, their faces sallow and gaunt, their eyes filled with fear as they looked at me. This wasn't the normal reaction of children from a wealthy family. Was this how they raised them? Earlier, when the babies were first born, they had clearly been overjoyed, cherishing them like treasures. Where are the other children? Dead. They're dead. My head buzzed. Sextuplets are naturally weaker than other children and are truly difficult to raise. The old woman spoke more and more emphatically. Besides, what does it have to do with you? What connection do my grandchildren have to you? You old hag, borrowing your grandchildren's lifespan to live well? Are we? What a black heart you have. Kira, who was always so calm, suddenly erupted in curses, startling me. The implications of her words sent shivers down my spine. Mia, bring your mother in here. If she borrowed others' lifespans, you can borrow hers. Kira raised an eyebrow, gesturing for me to hurry. The short distance from the inner courtyard to the outer garden, my whole body trembled with emotion. So, it was truly possible to save my mother. Kira said, this act of borrowing lifespan heavily damages one's yin virtue. If not careful, it leads to lineage extinction and a body full of ailments. Therefore, I must do this myself to help your mother. She will show you how to do it. But don't think about using this method to harm others. It only works this one time. My sister's mother-in-law frantically made phone calls for help, but none went through. She could only watch helplessly as my mother's body slowly softened, her complexion growing rosier, while the old woman herself, withered and shriveled, enduring intense pain. By the time my brother-in-law and his cousin arrived, it was too late. Their family had long known the secret of our village, that praying for blessings could lead to sextuplets. So, they had secretly lured women from the village to bear children, then borrowed the future lifespans of these infants. This secret was passed down only among those in power within the family each generation. The cousin clearly hadn't known. He only knew that my brother-in-law was actually infertile, which made the 6 children's sudden appearance so bizarre. My sister's mother-in-law also had cancer, and doctors had declared her critical multiple times. But after my sister gave birth, they both miraculously returned to normal. The curtain was torn open. My brother-in-law fiercely ordered his men to surround the villa, making it clear no one would escape today. What do you think the Fertility God is? Kira sneered. Just a rotten rat spirit. Do you think having it means your family can prosper forever? My brother-in-law said, cold and fearless, kill them, and the fertility god will still be our god. If this one dies, we can worship another. I held my phone, hesitating, then said, so, do you want to tell the police? Outside, police sirens wailed, growing louder. Dax gave a triumphant aha, and a thumbs up to me. Kira dabbed something on my eyes, and then I saw golden streams of light rapidly dissipating from the villa. In their place, more and more black bone-like fragments rushed in from all directions. This is called their luck has run out, the girl said with a mischievous wink, clearly in high spirits. The cousin stood there, his face full of regret. He had thought it was just a matter of dealing with the sextuplets and reducing his cousin's share. But now, all the dirty dealings of the entire corporation over the years were being exposed. It even involved an international organ trafficking organization. Scandal after scandal was unearthed, and the business empire collapsed in an instant. My mother's heart had started beating again. The 6 children who had died in her womb had been handled at the hospital. The wounds on my mother's body healed in just a few days, leaving no trace. Doctors were astonished, calling it a medical miracle. But my mother still hadn't woken up. Kira said, "You must perform 100 good deeds to awaken her." I also took in my sister's 2 remaining children to care for them. Kira gave me a substantial sum of money, telling me to raise these 2 children well, as they would both grow up to make great contributions to society. Her words were always a bit vague, and I didn't quite understand. But she was a good person, very mysterious, and incredibly capable. In my dreams at midnight, I always saw my sister. Her husband and mother-in-law never intended for her to live from the beginning. She was merely a breeding machine for them. Rats are prolific, with extremely strong reproductive capabilities. What fertility god? Just a rat spirit. It lent the fertility luck of rats to the lazy, foolish, and selfish people in the village. How did it borrow? Those heavily made-up women who entered the tree shrine knew best. It was simply a lustful demon. On the other hand, it constantly sought suitable individuals whose bodies it could possess, truly becoming human. My sister and I, and even the previous fertility maidens, were all its candidates. What angered me most was that my sister, at just 7 years old, had endured such inhumane torment. Growing up, facing those vague memories, she must have clearly recalled how she was tormented by that evil spirit. Within less than a year, the villagers either went mad or died. Suddenly, one night my father, weeping, stabbed himself to death. My grandmother went insane, hacked my father into pieces, and was then arrested by the police. The entire village, in just 1 year, withered into a ghost town. Kira said, "Those who commit such evil deeds aren't even qualified to enter hell after they die." And I asked, "I said, where do they go?" She said, "That ghostly summit specialized in taking in those who couldn't enter hell." I asked her, "Who are you, really?" She replied that she was just a sinner herself, telling me to perform many good deeds, and the karmic debt for borrowing my mother's lifespan would be lessened. Among 100 virtues, filial piety comes first, she said. Those borrowed lifespans, instead of residing in a wicked person, are better bestowed upon a filial child like you. About Kira, about Dax, and about Tui Nuong, whom they spoke of, I later heard many more stories. They were indeed 3 great, benevolent beings. Now,